What if sunlight were no longer something to fear, but something to revere? Not in the hippie sense of burning incense and dancing naked in the desert, but through the precise language of molecular cascades and immune modulation. I stumbled upon Rowan Jacobsen's piece in Scientific American, titled "Can Sunlight Cure Disease?" while skimming through what I thought would be another predictable slog through recycled wellness content. I was wrong. This wasn't another vitamin D fairy tale. This was a Molotov cocktail hurled at the very edifice of pharmaceutical dogma, a call to reawaken a forgotten cellular logic written not in tablets or patents but in photons. Suddenly, I found myself spiraling down a hallway of blistering ultraviolet and suppressed truths, and I thought, this is the story no one's talking about because it might just be too dangerous to say out loud. Kathy Reagan Young, a Virginia Beach resident and podcast host, does something unusual every morning. She steps out of the shower, goggles up, and kneels before a small UV light box, glowing like a haunted artifact. 4 minutes on each side of her torso, and then she's off. This ritual isn't cosmetic or spiritual. It's tactical. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2008, a disease that turns the body against its own nervous system, Kathy's life had disintegrated into a patchwork of naps, flares, and canceled plans. Then came the box, a narrowband UVB device developed by Cytokine, a medical startup aiming to rewire how we approach autoimmune dysfunction. It wasn't even marketed as a miracle. It arrived like a prototype, a curiosity. But within months, her fatigue vanished. Her disease activity score dropped to 1 out of 10. A rebirth, she called it. I call it blasphemy against a system built on incurability. Multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes, all ruthless autoimmune disorders where the immune system becomes its own worst enemy. A growing pile of data suggests that ultraviolet light, specifically UVB, doesn't just quiet the skin's inflammation, it calms the entire immune orchestra. And if this feels like sci-fi medicine, it is only because the gatekeepers of clinical orthodoxy haven't figured out how to monetize sunlight yet. The light boxes like Kathy's emit a specific bandwidth not associated with skin cancer, a surgical strike rather than a radiation bath. Initial results from small human trials and extensive animal studies are mounting. UV isn't just a calming agent, it's a conversation starter, a whisper to the immune system to stand down. Scientists like Prue Hart at the Kids Research Institute in Australia are chasing the mechanisms like bloodhounds. One of her quotes haunts me. UV light calms inflammation in the skin, the nervous system, the pancreas, and the gut. Its potential is not fully realized. That's code for, this could be the next Ozempic. And then the Latitude mystery. Why does multiple sclerosis erupt more violently the farther you get from the equator? Why do diseases of inflammation cluster in colder, darker regions? This pattern has stalked epidemiology for a century. A 2019 meta-analysis showed MS prevalence rising by 3.64 cases per 100,000 people with every degree of latitude. Canada, Northern Europe, the upper United States, hotspots of immune dysfunction. Even within individual countries, the trend holds. Australia becomes a case study in planetary illness. From tropical Townsville to gloomy Hobart, MS prevalence explodes sixfold. The question nobody seems willing to ask, what if we're sick not because of what we do, but because of where we are? For decades, the answer was vitamin D. The Garland brothers at Johns Hopkins University built an entire hypothesis around it in the 1980s, fueled by maps showing cancer rates falling with sun exposure. But now, that once glorious theory lies in shambles. Massive clinical trials on vitamin D supplementation yielded zilch. No consistent effect on cancer, heart disease, or autoimmune outcomes. It was a ghost molecule. We were chasing the echo of the sun, not the sun itself. Most humans get enough D from food or minimal sun exposure. The real action is in the photon-triggered pharmacology your skin performs without your conscious input. We thought we could outwit evolution with a capsule. We failed. The lesson? Maybe it was never about one molecule. Maybe the sun is a symphony, not a soloist. Inside your skin, a war is being fought every second. Urocanic acid, lumisterol, melatonin, serotonin, nitric oxide, oxytocin, and a family tree of unknown vitamin D cousins. When UV hits, it splits bonds and flips atoms like levers in a madman's laboratory. Some of these compounds reduce inflammation, others repair damage. Some travel to your lymph nodes and tell T cells to sit down and shut up. A researcher named Scott Byrne in Sydney identified 6 novel lipids created in response to UV that travel directly to the immune command centers of the body. These lipids act like bouncers at the cellular club, kicking out the rowdy cytokines and calming the whole inflammatory scene. This isn't alternative medicine. This is the body remembering what it used to know. Back to Prue Hart. In one study, she exposed 20 patients with early-stage MS to UVB treatments 3 times a week for 8 weeks. Within a week, inflammatory proteins in their blood began to drop. 3 months later, their disease severity scores fell by 13%. The control group scores rose by 14%. A year later, everyone in the control group had progressed to full-blown MS, but 30% of the UV-treated group had not. The therapy didn't just pause the immune assault, it rewired it. It retrained the bone marrow. These weren't temporary chemical tricks. These were ontological shifts. The immune system was being educated by light. Then there's the childhood evidence. Kids who spend less than 30 minutes outside per day are twice as likely to develop MS. Those who clock in more than an hour, 5 times lower risk. The skin on the back of the hand, scarred or not, becomes a proxy for lifelong sun exposure and an uncanny predictor of immune fate. Even birth month matters. Infants gestated during winter, when UV light is low, are more likely to develop MS later. This isn't astrology. This is biology's shadow. If light is a trigger for developmental immune calibration, what does our obsession with indoors, screens, and sterile environments actually cost us? It gets stranger. UV doesn't just fiddle with your immune system, it rewires your hormones and neurotransmitters. Beta endorphins, serotonin, cortisol, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and the elusive pro-opiomelanocortin. These molecules don't merely regulate mood, they are bridges between psyche and immunity. Depression, anxiety, chronic pain, conditions long siloed from immunology, are now being seen as the result of smoldering inflammation. UV exposure suppresses that fire at the biochemical level. Your skin isn't a barrier, it's a broadcast tower, sending chemical instructions inward with every photon absorbed. Healing, it seems, begins not in the mind, but in the dermis. And then comes the economic heresy. A UV box costs around $2,000. 1 year of Humira, the biologic used for autoimmune diseases, runs north of $80,000. Kaiser Permanente conducted an experiment. They handed out 2,200 light boxes to psoriasis patients. Only a third needed biologics afterward. That's millions in savings. Quiet revolution, silent rebellion, and that's why this is dangerous. If light can achieve what patented chemicals cannot, if healing can come from a glowing box instead of a monthly injection, then the entire medical industrial ecosystem quivers. This isn't just a treatment, it's an insurgency. Let's talk psoriasis, the strange autoimmune puzzle that triggered photoimmunology's reawakening. Doctors had observed for centuries that sunlight soothed the cracked, inflamed skin of psoriasis sufferers. They chalked it up to heat, maybe humidity, or just wishful thinking. But once psoriasis was reclassified as an autoimmune condition, The healing power of UV light made brutal sense. The body's immune response is overreacting. Skin cells are being shredded by friendly fire, and sunlight whispers, shh. But here's the kicker. When one patch of skin is treated with UV, other patches improve too. Healing in one place calms inflammation in another. The immune system isn't local. It's a network. That's not woo-woo mysticism. It's hard data. How do we square that with the reductionist model of drug-targeted symptom suppression? We don't. We blow it up. And it all started with mice. Margaret Kripke, back in 1974, exposed rodents to UV light and watched tumors bloom. But when she transplanted those tumors into new mice, the immune systems of the hosts destroyed them. 10 out of 10 times. Her discovery? UV light doesn't just mutate skin cells, it also suppresses immune surveillance. The original irradiated mice had their immune system switched off by sunlight, allowing cancer to grow. This was horrifying, fascinating, and absurdly paradoxical. From that moment, photoimmunology began its schizophrenic journey, both feared and ignored. Kripke's work accidentally cracked open one of the greatest riddles of modern biology. The immune system doesn't just protect, it overreacts, and UV light knows how to shut it up. The question is, can we trust that silence? When scientists took the UV therapy out of the skin and into the bloodstream, into mice with MS-like symptoms, they saw systemic anti-inflammatory shifts. The mice didn't just improve locally, their entire physiology recalibrated. That's not dermatology, that's homeostasis hacking. Then epidemiologists came knocking, comparing notes and charts, seeing UV not as a burn risk, but as a forgotten immune training mechanism. That idea, light as an ancient calibrator, is radically subversive. It challenges germ theory, the vaccination industrial complex, and the anti-sun hysteria that has defined modern public health. It reframes sunlight not as a threat, but as a tutor, one that modernity has locked in the basement. But the most unsettling revelation? Your risk for MS might be set before you're born. Several studies show that people whose first trimester occurred during winter months, when sunlight is lowest, are more likely to develop MS. This pattern repeats globally. It's not about snow or holidays or temperature. It's about light. Womb light, prenatal light. The idea that UV exposure during gestation can affect neuroimmune development is seismic. If early exposure can prevent catastrophic immune failure decades later, we're not talking about treatment anymore. We're talking about prevention. And not with pills, but with time outside, with sky, with heat, with radiation that evolution assumed we'd always have. The pharmaceutical industry is watching all this with gritted teeth. If light can reduce or replace biologics, they're cash cows, what then? A single injection of adalimumab, also known as Humira, costs more than most people's rent. It's designed for lifelong dependence. UV boxes, on the other hand, can be used at home, require no copay, and actually reset the system. This is not a minor detail. This is an existential threat to a trillion-dollar sector. And that's why you won't see Prue Hart on the cover of Forbes. That's why Kathy Reagan Young isn't trending on health influencer reels. Because if light therapy becomes normalized, the current model of chronic disease management burns to ash, and someone's yacht fund takes a hit. Let's revisit Kathy for a second. This woman, once shackled by cog fog and unpredictable paralysis, now hosts chats, works out, meditates, lives, and all it took was 4 minutes a day under a sterile violet glow. Her feedback helped redesign the device itself, smaller, more ergonomic, reminders for those suffering memory issues. She became more than a patient. She became a beta tester of a possible revolution. And unlike traditional meds, this therapy didn't just treat, it empowered. It gave her agency. She could heal without waiting for a doctor's blessing or a refill's approval. That, my friends, is the real subversion. Freedom. data does not lie. In Robin Lucas's 2010 study, the correlation between sun exposure and reduced MS risk was clearer than any link to vitamin D. This wasn't one rogue paper, it was the sharpening of a global pattern. Across continents, across age groups, the evidence kept pointing one direction: the sun matters. More precisely, how the body responds to sun matters. A child with sun-damaged hands has 1/3 the MS risk. What do we do with that? Ignore it? Or start making sun exposure part of pediatric protocols? Public health used to follow patterns, now it follows profits. And the patterns say, light heals. Cytokind, the company that sent Kathy her Lightbox, knows it's sitting on a powder keg. They're pushing for broader clinical trials, but those take time and money, and their success would obliterate the market for existing drugs. So the tension is obvious. If they succeed too well, they'll become public enemy number one to their own industry. If they move too slow, the opportunity dies in regulatory limbo. And in the meantime, people rot in hospital beds, families collapse, insurance premiums skyrocket, all while a silent, glowing box waits in a warehouse, forgotten, ignored, maybe even suppressed. Here's the biochemical twist. The skin doesn't just make vitamin D. It's a neuroendocrine organ. It communicates with the brain, the gut, the immune system. Under UV light, it churns out serotonin, nitric oxide, melatonin, endorphins, leptin, cortisol, each a lever in a different system. It's like a body-wide reset button disguised as a tan. When UV hits, it initiates a cellular broadcast, and every organ listens, which means phototherapy isn't just treating inflammation, it's rebalancing the whole. This explains why patients report mental clarity, reduced anxiety, improved sleep. These are not placebo effects, these are neurochemical cascades. We are not dealing with alternative medicine. We are dealing with alternative logic. The idea that health is something you generate, not consume. That immunity is trained, not injected. That your skin, maligned and misunderstood, is a frontline negotiator with reality. What the story of the photon protocol reveals is that maybe, just maybe, the war on sunlight was the war on autonomy. And now, we have a weapon of our own. It's called knowledge, and it glows violet. Cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, arthritis, asthma, even depression. These aren't conditions you usually lump together. But what if I told you they all have one quiet thing in common? Inflammation. Chronic, low-grade, sneaky inflammation. And guess what suppresses that beast better than most pills? Ultraviolet light. Yes, the same light that's been demonized in every dermatology pamphlet since 1985. It turns out the sun doesn't just warm your skin. It softens the internal blowtorch your immune system can become when it forgets what its job is. UV light has been shown to reduce the kind of systemic inflammation that forms the root bed for heart attacks and neurological degeneration. So maybe the next frontier in geriatric care isn't another cholesterol pill. It's a protocol of photon exposure, tailored and titrated like any prescription drug. Take type 1 diabetes. Another autoimmune wrecking ball. The immune system targets and annihilates pancreatic beta cells, and once those are gone, insulin becomes a permanent, expensive addiction. But studies in Australia and the United States show a strange latitude pattern yet again. Kids in northern regions have higher rates of type 1 diabetes, especially if they were born in months with low sunlight. UV exposure in early life could help train the immune system not to overreact, not to nuke its own insulin factories. That's not speculation, that's replication across multiple cohorts. Are we seriously going to sit on this knowledge while more kids get diagnosed every year because no one's willing to say out loud, maybe sunlight matters more than sugar? Even more radical is the notion that the skin's relationship with the immune system isn't a one-way street. It's a distributed intelligence system. Think of it: skin as antenna, receiver, transmitter. When UV photons hit, they don't just start chemical processes. They trigger a cascade of data exchanges, micro-updates, that reach all the way down to the lymphatic nodes. Byrne's lipid discoveries show that skin-based UV reactions send physical messengers directly to T cells and dendritic cells, instructing them not to attack, not to multiply, to stand down. It's a diplomatic function, not a defensive one. The skin is not a wall, it's a whisper network. This raises a dangerous question. Was the anti-sun campaign of the last 50 years built on incomplete science, or worse, intentionally selective science? When you dig deep, the fear of UV is based almost entirely on the correlation between sunlight and skin cancer. But skin cancer, for all its horror, is often treatable and highly visible. Cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's are not. They kill in silence years after the inflammation began. If UV exposure reduces the risks of these slow killers, then our obsession with sunscreen and indoor lifestyles might be the public health equivalent of pouring gasoline on a fire and blaming the match. Are we sacrificing long-term vitality for short-term vanity? This brings us to the pill fantasy. Pharmaceutical companies don't want to sell you sunlight, they want to distill it. They're scrambling to isolate the golden molecule, the one active compound that could be patented, bottled, and priced. But the problem is sunlight doesn't work like that. It's not one molecule, it's dozens. And they interact. The body doesn't respond to single notes, it responds to symphonies. Trying to capture UV therapy in a pill is like trying to bottle a thunderstorm. You'll get moisture, but you'll miss the electricity. And yet, the pursuit continues, because pills can be taxed, tracked, and monetized. Light cannot. Meanwhile, medical ethics lag behind. Can a doctor ethically prescribe sun exposure knowing the cancer risks, even if it helps with MS? Should public health policy shift towards safe sun exposure guidelines rather than blanket avoidance? These aren't theoretical questions, they're real clinical crossroads, and the reluctance to act, to even study these questions aggressively, reveals the fear baked into the system. Fear of liability, fear of error, but mostly fear of being wrong for decades. Because if the sun is medicine, then entire generations of dermatological and autoimmune protocols were based on a catastrophic misread. Which begs an even more heretical question. What if our modern epidemics, ADHD, allergies, anxiety, depression, aren't new diseases but symptoms of light starvation? What if our houses, schools, and offices are light deprivation chambers, slowly degrading immune tolerance and mental health? We know UV stimulates the production of neurotransmitters. We know inflammation is tied to mood disorders. And we know children spending more time indoors are at higher risk for nearly everything. So again, I ask, what if sunlight isn't dangerous, but its absence is? At some point, we need to confront the possibility that we got it all backward, that the cure isn't in the lab, it's in the sky, and that modern medicine, for all its genius, has created a system that thrives not on solving illness, but on managing it endlessly. The photon protocol is a wrench in that machine. It's cheap, accessible, and biologically coherent. That's why it's ignored. That's why it's dangerous. And that's why it's your responsibility, not your doctor's, to ask better questions. So what now? You start small. You question what you were told. You watch the sunrise. You get outside. You read the studies, not just the headlines. You buy a Lightbox if you're struggling. You experiment. You track your health. You reclaim agency. Because in a world that has privatized healing, the most revolutionary thing you can do is shine. You don't need to become a sun worshiper. Just stop being afraid of the thing that made you. Thank you for walking through the ultraviolet with me. If this opened a door in your mind or burned one down, subscribe, like, and share this with someone living in the shadows. Leave a comment below. Should we all be prescribed sunlight? Or is this just the placebo effect in a different glow? Either way, stay curious, stay rebellious, and above all, stay lit. Thank you for walking through the ultraviolet with me. If this opened a door in your mind, or burned one down, subscribe, like, and share this with someone living in the shadows. Leave a comment below. Should we all be prescribed sunlight? Or is this just the placebo effect in a different glow? Either way, stay curious, stay rebellious, and above all, stay lit.